Hey, so good to see you here. Today we cook eclairs, chocolate glazed and filled. I will teach you every tip, every trick, even chemistry and history. I'm Walter Trupp. I run my own cooking school. I used to manage some of the world's best restaurant kitchens. And in my videos, I'll make you think and cook like a Michelin star chef. Now everyone thinks that eclairs are French, and they are to some extent, but did you know that choux pastry, the dough to make eclairs, was invented by an Italian chef hundreds of years ago? But hey, I'll tell you more about that later. Eclairs are long-shaped small buns which are filled with cream, coated with chocolate or fondant icing, and today I show you how to cook them, running you through every single secret so that success for you is guaranteed. And by the end of this video, you are an eclair specialist who knows just about anything there is to know about those delicious buns. First, let's start with the equipment. You need to cook eclairs, or in fact all choux pastry, on a metal tray or silicone mat, not baking paper. Baking paper causes condensation and the heat cannot circulate. The moisture between paper and eclairs can literally not escape. And your pastry will stay soggy, so that further down the line, your choux pastry will most likely collapse like a souffle. And then you also need to have the right nozzles, because you need to have one larger nozzle to pipe the dough and one smaller nozzle to actually fill the dough in. So a French tip nozzle like you see here would be ideal, and you can find them online because it gives the eclairs some really fine lines, and they're not too deep, so it needs to be French tip, because a round nozzle, which you can use as well, will not have those ribbons and literally can often make your eclairs break on the side, which you can see here, and that makes the filling later on much harder. And then of course the nozzle that you need to fill the pastry. So let's start by switching on the oven, and we switch it on to traditional bake. Fan foods can be too invasive, and you go on 180 degrees or 350 degrees Fahrenheit to ensure your pastry will be nice and cooked. So let's start making the pastry, and what we do, we add the milk and you add the water, and to that you add some sugar and then a pinch of salt and then some butter. And if you use salted butter, then just leave the salt out of the recipe, and then you need to make sure that the liquid is at a full rolling boil and the butter is dissolved, because if you add the flour too early, the flour particles or the starch particles will not fully swell up, and then your pastry will have a totally different consistency and it will be too runny later on, and it's basically unusable. So once it's at a rolling boil, like you can see here, you lower the temperature, you then add all the flour in at once, and then you get a wooden spoon and you start stirring that. At the beginning it might look like a total mess, but you cook that for two reasons. First of all, to dry out the dough a bit further. The second one is to develop the gluten, and you know you have developed the gluten when you can see it like here, when it sort of forms a nicely shaped bowl where the pot is almost clean, and then transfer it into a mixing bowl, add the eggs. Don't worry about the hot dough, there's simply too many eggs to get cooked by that little bit of dough, and then get a spoon and beat that and stir that through, and basically until the dough has absorbed all the eggs. Now you can do that with a mix whisker or a mixer, but I'm simply too lazy because it takes me too long to clean that thing up. So just keep going with a spoon, and you do that for 2 to 3 minutes, and the dough will be nice and glossy then. And when you run your spoon through, you will see how the dough slowly closes up, and that's when you know that it is ready. So next, let's grease the tray, and you should use quite a shallow tray. Don't use a tray that's too deep, because that can have a negative effect on baking your eclairs. So a nice shallow tray, grease it with butter, and then we will measure it out. So I have a spatula here, which I basically dip into flour, and then I make sure that I place my choux pastry quite far apart, because it's going to rise by approximately, they're going to be at least 2 to 3 times as big as I pipe them out here right now. And if they are too close, they will not bake even, they will not bake on the sides, and again that will make them collapse. So give them plenty of space so that the dry heat can really travel all around them, like you see it here on the tray, and they brown up quite nicely. So the next thing is to fill the bag. I want to give you a little tip here, and just open the bag, cut it open, and then fill your nozzle in, and you need to make sure you don't cut the opening too wide, because you don't want the nozzle to fall through on the other side. I think that one is just, yeah, that worked out perfect. So then you push the bag into the tip, and that will help you with the dough not dripping out at the other side. And then put it into a cup like you see here, and then fill the dough into the bag. And you want to fold the bag over so that you can get the dough really far down the bag. That also avoids air pockets. And then when you want to pipe it out, you just basically take the bag, remove the bag from the nozzle, and then push it forward, and then you apply pressure from the bag. So you twist and turn it on the bag. That's where you apply the main pressure, and the dough also cannot ooze out on the other side. And then the final pressure you sort of apply with the other hand when you push at the front, and through that you have a really good even pressure on your bag, and it will be just turning out absolutely perfect. And then just push that dough a little bit back. You can adjust your eclairs, and here we go. So they should be around 10 to 12 centimeters long. The tip at the end, which often sticks a bit away, you can sort of just push that back with your finger. And some people do have a drink at that stage, because it helps them to keep their hands really calm. I like to play some good music, but you see, like here, if something goes wrong, don't worry about it. You just can put that back in the bag, and you just pipe it up again, and you do that until they're all perfect. So that's a great thing with choux pastry. So when you sort of try to cut it off like you see here, you need to stop applying the pressure on your bag. So stop applying the pressure, and then you try to sort of snap it off fairly quickly, because it can be really sticky. And don't worry, you can fix it with your finger. It will rise quite a lot later on, so you will not see that, and the dough does taste delicious, just as it is as well. And then you need to go in the oven, and to take approximately 25 to 30 minutes, and you probably wonder, that is a very long time for such small buns, but I will explain you now why, and what are the sort of other little pitfalls you can come across when you cook choux pastry. And the first tip I want to give you is not bringing all the liquids to a full boil, but hey, we covered that already. The other one is undercooking your choux pastry, so to a stage where the pastry doesn't form a really nice hard shell. Now it needs to form a nice hard shell, because that will help it to withstand the sort of tension that choux pastry can have from within. And there's a little tip I want to show you to avoid breakage on the sides like you see here. So basically, after 15 to 18 minutes, you open your oven, you get a skewer, and you poke a few holes into each eclair. Now that will help the eclair to escape some of the air, and it will not make them rise too much. Basically, they're not going to break on the side, and it will end up in much rounder shaped eclairs, which don't have a crack on the side like you see here. And that later on makes the filling of your eclairs so much better, because you can get much more filling within your eclairs, where you often can find that it oozes out on the side. But when you need to prick them, they will sink in a little bit like you see here, but don't worry too much about it, because if you do that after 15 minutes, they will act like a balloon rather than an atmosphere, and they will just assemble hot air within them again, and they will just rise back to its normal shape. And then after approximately 20 minutes, you will find that your eclairs have a really nice hard shell, and that is when you take them out, and by that time the center will have collapsed, and the center needs to obviously collapse so that lots and lots of filling can go in there, and that makes them so super delicious. So while it bakes along, you obviously need to be very patient. And so all sorts of things you can do. I'm just standing here waiting for those amazing eclairs to turn out exactly the way I want them. Another little tip I want to tell you now is to not ever be tempted to place two trays above each other into one oven. That's a big no-no for any cooking. One oven tray at a time. It never works, especially not in baking. It's one of the most common mistakes that people do, and it always leads to total disaster. No matter if it's Éclair, macarons or croque monsieur. And I do know, no one ever tells it out, but hey, that's why you're here, to learn it properly. 2 trays just never works. And next thing I want to teach you is a little chemistry lesson, which is when you place choux pastry into the dry heat oven, the surface of the pastry will seal the outside almost immediately. And it's sort of like turns into like a soft, fragile, jelly-like skin, and it stays like that for quite a while, basically as long as there's moisture trapped inside that soft shell. Now the moisture of course comes from the milk and the water, and that under heat transforms into the steam or gas, and it must evaporate through the skin, which takes quite a while, and this creates a lot of pressure inside the pastry as the steam is partially trapped, and this creates the swelling of the pastry. Now at the same time, the developed gluten in the flour will congeal and allow the cooked choux pastry to retain its swollen shape. And only when almost all the water has evaporated, the choux pastry will eventually hold its final shape without collapsing. And only when almost all the water has evacuated, the choux pastry will eventually take its nice brown color, hence the very, very long cooking time. Isn't that perfect? So let's move on to the filling, and that's my favorite part. I just love that filling. It tastes so amazing. And for me, I just love eating that stuff. And we start off by taking some vanilla, which you basically split in half, and then you scrape out the seeds, and make sure you cook the vanilla skin as well, because there's more flavor in the shell than there is in the seeds, so do not ever throw that out. And throw that into the pot, and the smell is just so good. The next thing goes the milk. And then you bring that to the boil. So if you understand that method I show you now, you basically know how to make a custard. That's what it is. We're just going to make a very, very thick custard. So we place the milk and half the sugar and the vanilla in the stock boiled, and we bring that to the boil. At the same time, we whisk the eggs with the remaining sugar till it starts to thicken, and then you add the corn flour and stir that through until it's nice and smooth. And you can do that, of course, in a round motion. You can do that in number 8 motion. It's always hurts your arm, that's for sure. Or you can do it in a left and right motion, so it's really up to you what you do there. I'm a bit lazy, I don't get my mix out just for that. I just keep whisking by hand, because until I get the mix out of the cupboard, put it all together, put it apart, clean it all up, put it back in the cupboard, it takes me probably 3 times as much as just doing that by hand. And then pour the boiling hot milk into the egg mix and whisk it together. Then return it to the saucepan and stir consistently with a flat spatula to make sure you scrape the bottom of the pan to move the mixture from the bottom of the pan to avoid burning of the cream and burning of the pot. And I know what you're thinking, because I need to bring that to the boil. You will think, I will overcook the eggs and they will all curdle, and that's where you're wrong, and that's the next chemistry lesson, because flour consists of starch, and starch molecules swell when in contact with liquid, and even more so when additionally in contact with heat. So think about the white sauce. In this case, the swelling of the starch molecule slows the protein coagulation and basically makes the protein in the egg resistant to overcooking, and that's exactly the same way how a meatloaf works, or is so much more tender if you put some soaked bread in it. So you cook that as long as it needs that you see a few bubbles rising from the center of the pot, and then you turn it off. And I tell you, that stuff, it just smells so good. It's just really, really yum. I would love to put my finger in it, but I need that. So next thing goes the chocolate, and then in goes the butter. And I know there's different versions of the recipe. Basically, recipes without butter, but I found if you add the butter, it makes it so much more creamy later on. If you just make it purely with flour, it can be a bit stodgy at the end. So you stir that together, you wrap it airtight, or put it in an airtight container, and then you put it in the fridge, and you wait until it reaches fridge temperature. And then you whisk it through to break it up, to soften it a little bit. And then you fill it into a piping bag using the same trick as I've shown you before. Make some holes into your eclairs where the filling can go in, and you do that of course on the bottom, and then gently pipe in the filling to make sure the filling really spreads itself nicely so that you have an even filling in your eclairs. To glaze them, I just use some chocolate fondant today. You can also buy some icing, you know, which you put onto cakes and dilute it with a bit of water and flavor it with some chocolate, like a really dark chocolate. Or you can just use chocolate in general. So to adjust it to see it has the right consistency, you just sort of need to form a nice ribbon, and you then see it holds on nicely to the eclair. Just make sure you glaze them really nicely. Let them sort of drip off for a few seconds and then turn them over just like you see here, so that the icing basically goes backwards rather than running down on the sides. You sometimes can also adjust it with your finger if you have to, and the temperature of that icing is around sort of 33 degrees, which is sort of around the same temperature that chocolate melts. So here we go, and then you can top them with whatever you want. I use some cocoa nibs. You can of course use some grated chocolate, or you can do what I love to do, just put on some gold leaves, and that looks pretty amazing. And here are your eclairs. And you remember at the beginning of the video I told you that eclairs are not completely French because choux pastry is Italian. Well, it's a bit like most people think croissants are French, but they're actually where I come from Austria. Or creme brulee, which is actually English. And you see, that's one of the big food tragedies. The English had one great dish and the French nicked it. However, with choux pastry it's a little different, as it was invented by a chef called Pantanelli, which was the personal chef of Catherine de' Medici in the 16th century, while they both lived in France, and originally called choux pastry pâté de popeline, and it was basically identical to today's profiteroles, although they have not been glazed. So the debate with choux pastry really stays open. Where does it come from? We know who invented it, but is it Italian or is it French? But then later on in the 18th century there was another twist to it, because when the famous French chef Antoine Carême made improvements to the dough, and from there on sort of new shapes were created. One became elongated and it was called duchesses, which evolved into the eclairs we know today. So here we go. You now know everything regarding eclairs. And what I'm gonna do now, I'm just gonna taste one of the things because they taste so delicious, and I just love the chocolate fondant on the top because it just adds a totally different level. But you just can glaze them with chocolate itself, I tell you. They are so good. I wish you would be here and could taste them with me. And as you see, I'm struggling a bit holding back, which is so good. And yeah, here we go. Chocolate eclairs. Fuck is that? Ah, shit. Huh? What? Huh? Just keep going. Okay, that's it. So thank you for watching, and check out my other videos.